Life as a gladiator wasn't glorious. It was a death sentence disguised as entertainment. You didn't choose the arena, it chose you. The real question isn't whether gladiators were tough, but whether you could survive in a world where your bleeding body was just another Sunday spectacle. Most couldn't. Would you? Freedom was the first sacrifice on your path to becoming a gladiator. The arena didn't care about your past, only that your body could provide entertainment before it broke. Most who entered the ludus had no choice in the matter. Prisoners of war filled the ranks after Roman conquests. Carthaginians, Gauls, Germans, Dacians. Anyone unlucky enough to be captured alive instead of dying honourably in battle. The Romans particularly valued warriors from tribes with fighting traditions. A Thracian who'd wielded a curved blade since childhood had a head start on weapons training. Criminals found themselves condemned ad ludum, sentenced to the games, for crimes ranging from theft to murder. For these men, becoming gladiators offered a slim chance at extended life rather than immediate execution. Slaves who proved too rebellious for household service were sold to lanistae, the businessmen who owned and operated gladiatorial schools, as punishment and profit for their masters. Not everyone entered the arena in chains. Some free Romans voluntarily signed auctoramenti, legal contracts surrendering their freedom. The desperate, the debt-ridden, the thrill-seekers, all willing to risk death for the promise of fame and fortune. When you signed this contract, you literally agreed to be burned, bound, beaten, or killed by the sword. The law required you to speak these words aloud. Did that moment of clarity make some reconsider? Too late once the stylus touched the wax tablet. Selection wasn't random. Lanistae assessed potential fighters with the calculating eye of livestock buyers. Height, shoulder width, leg strength, reaction speed, all scrutinized like merchandise. They measured calves and forearms, checked teeth and eyes for signs of disease. Your body determined your value and your future fighting style. Tall men with long reach became secutores. Stockier, powerful men became murmilones. Agile, lean men were destined for the net and trident of the retiarius. Even your temperament mattered. Show too much aggression during assessment, you'd be beaten into submission. Show too little, you'd be deemed worthless. The perfect gladiator combined controlled aggression with disciplined obedience. A killing machine that killed only on command. While your status as slave, criminal, or desperate volunteer determined how you entered the ludus, gladiator school, once inside those walls, everyone shared the same brutal reality: the breaking and remaking of your body through merciless training. The breaking began your first day in the ludus. Forget your past life, whether warrior, criminal, or free man. Your new identity started with the snap of a whip across your back. Training wasn't designed to teach you, it was designed to remake you. Doctores, typically scarred veterans who'd survived enough fights to earn freedom, oversaw your transformation with merciless precision. They'd been where you were. They knew exactly how far to push before breaking you completely. Days began before dawn. First came basic exercises, running laps around the training ground wearing weighted metal vests, climbing ropes until your hands bled, jumping wooden barriers until your legs trembled. Could you imagine doing this for hours before even touching a weapon? This wasn't about building strength. It was about breaking your will, showing you that your body belonged to the ludus now. When you finally touched weapons, they weren't the gleaming steel you'd dreamed of. Recruits trained with wooden rudies, practiced swords twice as heavy as battle weapons. Hours spent thrusting, parrying, and striking wooden posts wrapped in rope. Make the same motion 1,000 times until your arm moved on instinct. Swing a weighted shield until your shoulder screamed. Your doctores didn't want you thinking during combat. Thinking got you killed. They wanted your body to react automatically. Evenings brought the only respite, food, but even meals served the ludus's purpose. Forget meat and wine. Gladiators subsisted primarily on barley porridge, beans, dried fruit, and occasionally fish. Romans mockingly called fighters hordearii, barley men. This high carbohydrate diet served two purposes. It provided sustained energy and created a protective layer of fat over vital organs. A lean gladiator was a dead gladiator. That extra padding absorbed shallow cuts that might otherwise slice arteries. Sleep came in cramped cells, sometimes chained to walls, not from cruelty, but to prevent escape or suicide. Many new recruits preferred death to the ludus. Lannistae protected their investments. Your life wasn't yours to take. The routine repeated daily, monthly, yearly. Your body transformed. Shoulders broadened, arms thickened unevenly from weapon training, legs became corded with muscle. Scars accumulated from training accidents. Some men broke, others adapted. The grueling daily regime wasn't just about building muscle. It was about transforming you into something unrecognizable. A physical specimen whose body would be classified and molded into one of the distinct fighting styles that crowds would bet on and cheer for. Your body type dictated your destiny in the arena. You wouldn't choose your fighting style, it would choose you. Lannistae and Doctores examined new recruits like sculptors assessing marble, looking for the fighting style hidden within each physique. Were you short but powerfully built? You'd become a murmillo, wielding a rectangular shield and straight sword, your fish-crested helmet marking you as a fishman. The nickname wasn't affectionate. It referred to the pursuit of your typical opponent, the net-wielding retiarius, who would try to catch you. If you were of medium height with strong legs, you might become a thraex, fighting with a small curved shield, and the sika, a curved sword designed to slip around enemy shields. Your legs would be heavily armoured, but your chest remained exposed for the crowds who paid to see blood, not protection. Did you think the armour was for your safety? It was merely to prolong the spectacle. Tall, lean men became retiarii, the fishermen of the arena. Armed with trident and net, you'd wear almost no armour, just a padded shoulder guard, gallerus, protecting your left side. Your speed was your defence. Your face remained uncovered, allowing the crowd to see your expressions as you fought and died. When was the last time you saw a gladiator movie showing the most popular Roman fighting style, nearly naked men with fishing nets? Even more specialised types existed. The secutor, or pursuer, was specifically designed to fight the retiarius. Their smooth, rounded helmets prevented nets from catching, with tiny eye holes that limited vision but protected against trident strikes. The provocator fought only other provocatores, heavily armoured on the front, but vulnerable from behind. The rare Dimachurus wielded two swords with minimal armour, relying on offensive fury rather than defence. You'd train exclusively in your assigned style for years. No switching, no variety. Day after day, the same movements, the same weapons, until they became extensions of your body. Your fighting style wasn't just training, it became your identity. The crowds wouldn't cheer your name, they'd cheer your type. The thraex, the murmillo. Matchups were carefully planned for maximum drama. Contrasting styles created better shows. A heavily armoured fighter against a nimble one. A long-reach trident against a short sword. Speed versus power. Every pairing designed to create tension, delay the killing moment, and make the crowd roar. While mastering your assigned fighting style consumed your waking hours, the weapons and armour you'd eventually wield weren't just tools of your trade. They were instruments designed specifically to create the most dramatic, blood-soaked spectacle possible. The instruments of gladiatorial combat were designed with a single purpose: to create visually impressive wounds while prolonging the spectacle. Your weapons weren't meant for quick kills. That would disappoint the crowd. They were tools for a bloody performance where your pain was the entertainment. The gleaming steel wasn't just deadly, it was theatrical. Training weapons outweighed combat weapons by nearly double. Swinging a wooden sword weighing twice what you'd use in the arena built the specialised strength needed for lightning-fast strikes when it mattered. By the time you wielded actual steel, it felt unnervingly light in your hand. Combat weapons were masterfully crafted, balanced, razor-sharp, and maintained by dedicated armamentarii, who spent hours honing edges to surgical sharpness. A gladiator sword could slice through flesh with minimal resistance, creating clean, dramatic wounds that bled profusely without immediately killing. Your armour told its own story of calculated vulnerability. Helmets were engineering marvels, elaborately decorated with embossed designs, horsehair crests, or bronze figurines that identified your fighting style from across the arena. But these same helmets severely restricted vision and breathing. Tiny eye holes limited peripheral vision, and breathing holes near the mouth were often inadequate during extended combat. Have you ever tried fighting while essentially blindfolded and struggling to breathe? The strategic gaps in armour weren't oversights, they were intentional. Thighs remained exposed because leg wounds bleed impressively without being immediately fatal. The manica, a segmented arm guard made of metal strips bound with leather, protected your weapon arm while leaving other vulnerable areas bare. Ochrea leg guards covered only the leading leg, leaving the other exposed for the crowd's entertainment. Shields varied dramatically between fighting styles. The murmillo's scutum was curved and rectangular, providing extensive coverage. The Thraex's palmula was small and flat, offering minimal protection. Each shield type forced specific fighting techniques, making matches more dynamic and unpredictable. This equipment represented substantial investment. A complete gladiatorial kit could cost more than a labourer might earn in 3 years. Each piece was custom fitted, helmets sized to heads, greaves moulded to legs, and manichae shaped to arms. Lanistae guarded this investment jealously, as damaged equipment meant expensive repairs. The weapons and armour you'd spend years mastering weren't just for show. They were designed for the moment when training ended and you emerged from the dark tunnel into the blinding light of the arena, where tens of thousands of spectators waited to see if you lived or died. Stepping from the dark holding cells beneath the arena into the blinding Mediterranean sun was like emerging into another world. Your eyes would struggle to adjust as the deafening roar of 50,000 spectators crashed over you like a physical wave. The Colosseum of Rome, or any of the hundreds of amphitheatres throughout the empire, wasn't just a venue. It was a machine designed to amplify human emotion, to transform bloodlust into something approaching religious ecstasy. The day began with the Pompa, a ceremonial parade where you'd march in ornate, embroidered cloaks covering gleaming armour. Musicians played flutes, horns and water organs while you processed like sacrificial animals dressed for slaughter. The crowd would cheer favourites and jeer others, placing bets on who would survive the day. Could you keep your face impassive as they wagered on your death? Before combat, the editor, the wealthy official sponsoring the games, would inspect your weapons. He'd run his thumb along blades, checking their sharpness, occasionally drawing his own blood to demonstrate to the crowd that the danger was real. Weapons too dull wouldn't please the spectators, too sharp and the matches would end too quickly. If the emperor attended, you'd recite the famous salute, Ave Imperator Morituri Te Salutant. Hail Emperor, those about to die salute you. Not exactly a confidence-building pre-fight ritual, was it? Contrary to popular belief, this phrase wasn't used at every match, but reserved for special imperial games. The Prelucio came next, exhibition fighting with wooden weapons, a warm-up to showcase your skills and build audience excitement. This preview influenced the betting odds and gave spectators their first taste of the violence to come. The sensory experience was overwhelming, the smell of blood soaking into sand from earlier matches, sweat from 50,000 bodies packed together in summer heat, incense burning to mask the stench, food vendors selling fried chickpea cakes and fish sauce, the sound of feet stomping wooden boards in rhythm, trumpets signalling key moments. The acoustics of the Colosseum amplified everything, creating a wall of sound that disoriented first-time fighters. You'd enter through the Porta Sanavivaria, the gate of life. The corpses of the day's losers would exit through the Porta Libertinaria, the gate of death. The symbolism wasn't subtle. As overwhelming as the arena's sensory assault was, the real terror wasn't the crowd or the spectacle. It was the moment when you locked eyes with your opponent, a man who had endured the same brutal training as you, but who was now determined to spill your blood on the sand. The eyes staring back at you from behind a helmet weren't filled with rage or bloodlust. They held calculation, assessment, professional detachment. Forget Hollywood's wild, frenzied slashing. Real gladiatorial combat was a technical affair, a violent chess match where each movement had purpose and consequence. The first moments involved careful circling, almost always counterclockwise due to right-handed fighters keeping their weapon sides engaged. These opening seconds weren't hesitation, but crucial evaluation, each fighter looking for weaknesses in stance, favoured moves or hidden injuries. Combat resembled modern fencing more than barbaric hacking. Fighters used precise thrusts, calculated parries, and strategic footwork. Every movement conserved precious energy. A wild, missed swing meant dropping your guard and wasting strength you couldn't afford to lose. 3 minutes of intense fighting in 30 pounds of gear under the Mediterranean sun would leave even the fittest gladiators gasping for breath. Could you maintain technical precision while your lungs burned and sweat stung your eyes? The Summarudus, referee, enforced strict rules with a long staff, separating clinched fighters and punishing illegal moves. Running from your opponent or showing cowardice brought severe punishment, sometimes execution, regardless of the fight's outcome. The arena demanded courage above all else. Most matches didn't end in death, despite popular imagination. Professional gladiators were expensive investments, and Lannistai preferred injuries over fatalities. A solid hit to the leg, arm, or non-vital area typically ended matches. When a fighter fell or signalled defeat by raising an index finger, the crowd decided his fate with chants of "Iugola," kill him, or "Mita," let him go. The editor made the final decision, but rarely contradicted the crowd's wishes. Musicians played throughout, building tension with drums and horns. Attendants rushed in during brief pauses to rake fresh sand over blood-soaked areas, not for cleanliness, but to prevent fighters from slipping in the gore of previous matches. The greatest enemy wasn't your opponent, but exhaustion. Dehydration and heat prostration claimed many fighters before their opponents could. 10 minutes of combat left even veterans trembling with fatigue. 15 minutes felt like an eternity. By then, shields became unbearably heavy, reaction times slowed dangerously, and precision gave way to desperate survival. Surviving your first combat was only the beginning. Now you faced the brutal reality of healing from wounds with primitive medical care, all while knowing that your next fight was already being planned. The wound that would have killed an ordinary Roman might only temporarily sideline a valuable gladiator. Sprawled on a treatment table in the Ludus Valetudinarium, medical facility, you would experience surprisingly sophisticated care from dedicated Medici who specialised in gladiatorial injuries. These practitioners weren't the bumbling quacks treating average citizens. They were skilled professionals who understood anatomy through direct observation of wounds and had developed specialised techniques through years of treating combat injuries. Blood loss received immediate attention. Medici used hot irons to cauterize severed vessels, applied pressure bandages, and administered herbal coagulants. Deep lacerations were cleaned with wine or vinegar, unknowingly using alcohol as an antiseptic centuries before germ theory. Wounds were then stitched with animal sinew using curved bronze needles or closed with metal clamps that functioned like modern surgical staples. Have you ever considered that your value as property meant you'd receive better medical treatment than most free Romans? Bone setting techniques were remarkably advanced. Splints, casts made from flour and vinegar paste, and carefully managed traction realigned broken bones. Archaeological evidence from gladiator graveyards shows fractures that healed so perfectly they're barely visible in skeletal remains. Even successful amputations were performed when necessary, with survival rates that wouldn't be matched until the 19th century. Pain management relied on opium dissolved in wine, creating a potent analgesic that dulled agony during treatment and recovery. Specialised recovery diets included increased protein from beans, eggs, and occasionally meat. Luxuries rarely provided during training. Calcium-rich foods strengthened healing bones. Your value determined your treatment quality. Champions received the best care available. Lesser-known fighters might receive more cursory attention. Recovery wasn't about your comfort, but about investment protection. Lanastai calculated the cost of treatment against your potential future earnings. Those deemed too damaged for premier arenas might be sold to provincial games, where standards were lower and crowds less discriminating. Not all injuries healed completely. Gladiators with permanent damage that prevented fighting might serve as doctores training new recruits, sparring partners who help prepare others for combat, or if particularly knowledgeable, tactical advisors developing fighting strategies for upcoming matches. Your expertise remained valuable even if your body failed. While the medicus might save your life from battle wounds, many gladiators faced a slower, less visible enemy. The psychological toll of living as both a celebrity and a slave, trapped between adoration and disposability. The invisible wound scarred deeper than any blade. Living with scheduled death hanging over your head created a unique psychological burden that few modern people could comprehend. How would you sleep knowing each morning might be your last? Most gladiators managed this existential dread by embracing fatalism, a recognition that death was certain and only its timing remained unknown. This mental framework wasn't resignation, but a pragmatic adaptation that allowed functioning under unbearable pressure. Superstition flourished in this environment. Gladiator graves reveal numerous amulets, talismans, and good luck charms clutched even in death. Small carved figurines of Mercury, guide to the underworld, were particularly common. Pre-fight rituals became obsessively important. Touching certain stones, repeating specific phrases, or wearing particular undergarments beneath armour. The rational mind recognises these as meaningless, but in a world where death seemed random, any perceived control provided comfort. Many gladiators developed intense religious devotion. Nemesis, goddess of fate and vengeance, received particular attention from fighters. Small shrines to her stood in most ludi, where gladiators would place offerings before matches. Did divine favour determine who lived or died? Many believed so, finding comfort in the idea that survival meant divine blessing rather than random chance. What we would now recognise as post-traumatic stress disorder affected many veterans. Surviving gladiators described flashbacks, intrusive memories, and emotional numbness familiar to modern combat veterans. Sleep disorders were nearly universal. Insomnia before fights, nightmares after them. Ancient medical texts describe treatments for these conditions, including sleep aids and relaxation techniques. Doctores monitored fighters for these symptoms, as psychological distress directly impacted combat performance. Depression and suicidal thoughts plagued many. Archaeological evidence reveals security measures in gladiator quarters specifically designed to prevent suicide attempts. For some, the psychological burden became unbearable. leading to deliberate acts of self-destruction in the arena, essentially using opponents as instruments of suicide. The most effective psychological buffer was camaraderie. Bonds between fighters transcended typical relationships. Men who might eventually kill each other still developed brotherhood through shared suffering. Graves sometimes contained tokens from fellow gladiators, small carvings or personal items buried with the dead. Even bitter rivals might honour each other this way, recognising their shared experience in a world no outsider could understand. Despite the psychological burdens, gladiators found unexpected compensation in something few other slaves ever experienced: genuine fame and a strange form of social status that transcended their legal standing. Fame created a bizarre paradox in the gladiator's life. While legally classified as infamous, literally without reputation, successful fighters achieved celebrity status that emperors themselves might envy. The walls of Pompeii tell this story clearly. Graffiti proclaiming Celadus the Thracian makes all the girls sigh, or Crescens the net fighter holds 12 victories and the hearts of all women, reveals adoration that transcended social boundaries. Would you choose fame without rights or freedom without recognition? Fans followed favourite fighters with obsessive dedication. They collected souvenirs, clay oil lamps moulded with gladiatorial scenes, small bronze figurines of famous fighters, and commemorative cups, sometimes containing actual blood or sweat from the arena sand. Parents bought gladiator dolls with miniature weapons and removable armour pieces for their children. Wealthy homes displayed elaborate mosaics depicting famous matches. Would you recognise this merchandising machine as something distinctly modern? The ancient sports celebrity industry operated with surprising sophistication. Top fighters became valuable marketing tools. Their images appeared on everyday items from wine bottles to bread stamps. Some endorsed specific gladiatorial schools or weapons manufacturers. The most famous charged appearance fees to attend private banquets, where they would demonstrate techniques or simply allow wealthy patricians to boast about their presence. Financial opportunities existed far beyond prize money from actual combat. Women's fascination with gladiators became legendary. The combination of physical prowess, courage, and the forbidden nature of their status created powerful attraction. Affairs between aristocratic women and famous fighters became scandalous gossip. Some wealthy women reportedly paid substantial bribes to guards for private meetings with celebrated gladiators. The gossip columns of Rome would have thrived on these stories. Yet these same celebrated fighters couldn't vote, hold office, or legally marry Roman citizens. They remained property, technically worth no more than the price their lanista set. Emperor Commodus scandalized Rome not by appearing in gladiatorial combat, but by lowering himself to a profession legally considered beneath human dignity. His gladiatorial exploits represented not just eccentric behaviour, but a fundamental assault on social order. An emperor purposely debasing himself below his station. The strange contradiction of being simultaneously famous and legally inferior created unique opportunities, especially for those rare gladiators who survived long enough to earn something even more valuable than fame: their freedom. Freedom remained a distant dream that few gladiators lived long enough to grasp. Surviving 3 to 5 years in the arena required extraordinary skill, luck, and the favour of the crowd. The typical fighter needed at least 20 victories, 20 occasions where an opponent lay bleeding before him and the crowd chanted, "Mita!" Let him go, rather than "Iugula!" Kill him. Could you defeat 20 trained killers and win over the fickle mob 20 times? Most couldn't. For the exceptional few, freedom came through a formal ceremony where the editor of the games presented the rudies, a wooden training sword symbolising release from the obligation to fight. This wasn't necessarily complete legal freedom. For slave gladiators, it meant they were no longer required to risk death in the arena, but might still belong to their lanista. For the Octoratus, who had voluntarily contracted himself, it meant the contract was fulfilled. The rudis became the most prized possession of a retired gladiator. Veterans displayed these wooden swords prominently in their homes, often in elaborate cases. More than trophies, they represented something almost no other slave could achieve: earned freedom through individual excellence rather than a master's whim. Life after the arena presented contradictions: freedom without preparation for using it, fame without respectability, skills that had limited application in civilian life. Many former gladiators leveraged their combat abilities by becoming bodyguards for wealthy Romans or joining the urban watch. Others found positions as trainers in the very ludi where they had once been property, teaching new recruits the skills that had kept them alive. Some struggled with normality after years of extreme violence and adulation. Archaeological evidence suggests many suffered health consequences from accumulated injuries: arthritis, poorly healed fractures, and chronic pain. The psychological adjustment proved equally challenging. After experiencing the roar of 50,000 spectators, ordinary life felt hollow. Paradoxically, some freed gladiators voluntarily returned to the arena as paid performers. Having earned freedom, they chose to risk death again for substantial compensation. These rare fighters commanded extraordinary fees, sometimes more than 10 times what they earned before gaining the rudis. The social stigma never fully disappeared. Freed gladiators remained infames, legally unable to vote or hold office. Marriage to citizens was complicated. Some managed to save enough to establish small businesses or purchase land, creating economic stability despite social limitations. While freedom offered escape for the exceptional few, for most gladiators, their story would end not with retirement, but with a final fatal performance, where their death would be just another afternoon's entertainment. Death in the arena wasn't merely an ending, it was a performance with its own choreography. Your final moments would be as ritualized as your entrance had been. Even in death, you remained an entertainer, expected to face your end with dignity and courage. Crying out, begging, or displaying fear would earn posthumous contempt. The crowd wanted to see good deaths, stoic acceptance that reinforced Roman virtues of discipline and courage in the face of fate. The final sequence began when you fell wounded and unable to continue. The summa rudis, referee, would approach, checking if your defeat was genuine. Faking injury brought severe punishment, so fallen gladiators rarely attempted deception. If truly defeated but still alive, you would drop your weapons and raise your left hand with index finger extended, the missio, formally requesting mercy. The crowd's response determined your fate. Spectators waved handkerchiefs or shouted "Mitte" if impressed by your performance, or pointed thumbs toward their chests, not downward as commonly depicted, and shouted "Iugula" if you had fought poorly or were disliked. Have you ever considered that your life might depend on how entertainingly you bled? The editor made the final decision, though rarely against the crowd's wishes. If denied mercy, you were expected to kneel and tilt your chin up, exposing your neck. Your opponent would place a hand on your head and thrust a dagger precisely between your cervical vertebrae at the base of the skull, severing the spinal cord. This method ensured a visually dramatic but relatively quick death. The victor rarely performed this task. It was considered dishonorable to kill an unresisting opponent. Death attendants dressed as Charon, mythological ferryman to the underworld, entered next. These costumed officials verified death by applying hot irons to ensure you weren't feigning. The body would be dragged by hooks through the Porta Libertinaria, Gate of Death, leaving a trail of blood in the sand that would be covered before the next match. Famous gladiators sometimes received death masks, plaster casts of their faces made immediately after death. These became collector's items for wealthy fans. Most bodies ended in mass graves, though fighters who belonged to burial societies, collegia, might receive proper funeral rites, with comrades ensuring proper passage to the afterlife. The business of gladiatorial combat wasn't just about life and death, it was about money. And behind every drop of blood spilled in the arena was a complex financial system that turned human suffering into enormous profit. Blood and death created fortunes in the Roman world. Behind the spectacle of the arena lay a sophisticated business empire that treated human lives as commodities to be bought, sold, trained, and wagered upon. The lanista, gladiatorial school owner, functioned as both investor and talent manager, calculating profits with cold efficiency. Top lanista became some of the wealthiest men in the empire, despite their technical status as infames, legally excluded from the upper classes. The economics worked through a rental system. Game sponsors, editors, paid lanistae to provide fighters for specific events. Contracts specified precise numbers of gladiators, fighting styles, equipment quality, and compensation for damaged property. Insurance clauses required editors to pay substantial compensation for killed or permanently injured fighters. Would you believe that a champion gladiator might be valued at 15,000 denarii, enough to buy a luxurious villa? The costs grew so excessive that Emperor Marcus Aurelius eventually instituted price controls, capping rental fees to prevent economic distortion. For politicians, sponsoring games represented essential political investment. Careers advanced or collapsed based on the quality of entertainment provided. Records show magistrates spending multiple years' personal income on single events. Provincial officials often bankrupted themselves funding games to gain popularity, leading to higher offices. The phrase, bread and circuses, reflected a political reality. Entertainment bought public support more effectively than substantive policy. Betting created a parallel economy surrounding matches. Professional bookmakers, sponsiones, calculated odds for different outcomes. Gambling addictions devastated Roman households, as contemporary writers lamented. Tacitus described men who wager ancestral farms on a single match. The economic impact rippled throughout society. Training schools employed hundreds, from specialised trainers to cooks, cleaners and administrators. Amphitheatres required maintenance staff, ticket takers and security. Food vendors, souvenir sellers and prostitutes clustered around venues. Rural farms supplied the massive quantities of food needed to maintain fighter conditioning. The Ludus Magnus, largest gladiatorial school in Rome, consumed resources equivalent to supporting a small town. For provincial cities, hosting games represented enormous expense. Records from Pompeii show municipal games costing the equivalent of an entire year's tax revenue. Yet cities competed to host the grandest spectacles, seeing them as essential for demonstrating prosperity and Roman identity. While the financial machinery of the games spanned the empire, the true cultural impact was even greater, as gladiatorial combat wasn't just entertainment. It was a powerful expression of Roman values and identity that shaped everything from politics to religion. Gladiatorial combat wasn't merely blood sport, it was a living embodiment of what it meant to be Roman. The arena served as a theatre where core values were displayed, reinforced and celebrated through ritualized violence. When you watched a Thracian fighter face a Murmillo, you weren't just seeing a match, you were witnessing a cultural ritual as significant as any religious ceremony. Have you ever considered how societies transmit their deepest values? Romans did it through controlled bloodshed. The games originated from Etruscan funeral rites, where sacrificial combat honoured the dead. This connection to ancestor worship persisted even as games expanded into public spectacles. The arena remained a space where Romans confronted death directly rather than hiding it away. A culture that believed facing mortality created stronger citizens. Virtues, courage, disciplina, discipline, and constantia, steadfastness, weren't abstract concepts in Roman thought. They were qualities demonstrated through the gladiator's performance. When a wounded fighter raised his hand seeking mercy rather than begging or fleeing, he displayed the exact virtues expected of Roman soldiers and citizens. The crowd's judgment on who deserved to live or die represented a public referendum on these values. Politically, games provided powerful symbolism. Fighters representing conquered peoples, Thracians, Gauls, Samnites, battled in stylized versions of their native fighting techniques, repeatedly enacting Rome's military victories. The message was clear. Resistance to Roman power always ended in submission or death. Religious dimensions permeated the spectacle. Games began with sacrifices to gods, particularly Mars and Nemesis. The pompa, opening procession, mirrored religious ceremonies. The arena sand itself, called harina, was considered spiritually purified by blood. Gladiatorial combat created rare social unity in a stratified society. From slaves to emperors, all classes shared this cultural experience. Special seating arrangements paradoxically reinforced social hierarchy while creating shared excitement. The specialized vocabulary of the arena entered everyday Latin. Political opponents crossed swords. Unsuccessful people fell in the arena, and determined individuals stood like gladiators. The imposing architecture of amphitheatres, especially the Colosseum, physically expressed Roman engineering dominance. These massive structures, often the largest buildings in a city, contained complex systems for moving people, animals and equipment. Even in distant provinces, amphitheatres marked spaces as truly Roman. The cultural power of the gladiatorial tradition was so immense that even as Roman society transformed and Christianity gained influence, the bloody spectacle persisted long past its expected expiration date. A tradition that had survived wars, regime changes, and economic crises for nearly 700 years didn't disappear overnight. The decline of gladiatorial combat came gradually, pushed by converging forces rather than a single dramatic moment. By the 4th century CE, the games faced mounting opposition from a source their creators could never have anticipated: Christian theology that viewed blood sports as fundamentally incompatible with religious teachings. Emperor Constantine I, the first Christian emperor, began restricting gladiatorial combat in 325 CE, though he stopped short of outright prohibition. His edicts limited the sentencing of criminals to the arena and reduced state funding for games. Could a tradition so deeply embedded in Roman identity be legislated away? Not immediately, but these first restrictions marked the beginning of the end. Economic realities accelerated what religious objections began. The costs of maintaining gladiatorial schools, training fighters, and staging elaborate spectacles became increasingly unsustainable during the empire's 3rd and 4th century economic crises. Military needs during periods of external threat siphoned potential gladiators into army service, where their fighting skills served imperial defence rather than entertainment. The dramatic story of Saint Telemachus, a monk who allegedly leapt into the arena to stop a fight and was killed by the crowd, supposedly prompted Emperor Honorius to issue the final ban in 404 CE. While this narrative was popularized by later Christian writers, contemporary evidence suggests a more gradual phasing out rather than a single dramatic event. Public entertainment preferences shifted toward less controversial spectacles. Chariot racing in particular replaced gladiatorial combat as the predominant mass entertainment. The Circus Maximus in Rome could hold 3 times the Colosseum's capacity, making it both more profitable and less objectionable to Christian authorities. The last recorded gladiatorial combat in Rome occurred in 404 CE, though the practice continued in some eastern provinces until the 440s. Abandoned training facilities fell into disrepair or were repurposed. Amphitheatres became quarries for building materials, markets, or fortifications during uncertain times. Some, like the arena at Arles, were converted into miniature walled towns. As actual combat faded from living memory, stories of gladiators became increasingly romanticised. The brutal reality gave way to nostalgic tales emphasising courage and honour, rather than the exploitation and bloodshed that defined the actual experience. While the actual practice of gladiatorial combat eventually disappeared, its impact on human imagination proved immortal, as the brutal reality of the arena was transformed over centuries into something that bears little resemblance to what you would have experienced as a real gladiator. What you've seen in Hollywood bears little resemblance to the gladiators uncovered by modern archaeology. Their bones tell the true story, one that contradicts almost everything popular culture has taught us. Excavations of gladiator cemeteries in Ephesus, Turkey and York, England, have revealed skeletal remains that function as biological records of the brutal profession. These bones don't lie or romanticize. They show exactly what gladiatorial life did to human bodies. The most striking discovery is their bone density. Gladiator remains show significantly higher mineral content than contemporary Romans, particularly in their arms and legs. This aligns perfectly with ancient accounts of their specialized diet, rich in plant ash and calcium, a deliberate nutritional strategy to strengthen bones against fractures. Have you ever considered that these fighters had a scientifically advanced diet that modern sports nutritionists would recognize? Healed wounds tell stories of advanced medical care. Skeletons show evidence of successful amputations, expertly set fractures, and skillfully treated head injuries. Some skulls display multiple healed wounds, proof that fighters survived serious combat repeatedly. These remains directly contradict the Hollywood myth that most matches ended in death. Archaeological evidence suggests only 1 in 5 to 1 in 10 fights were fatal. Still dangerous, but far from the guaranteed death sentence portrayed in films. Popular misconceptions extend beyond mortality rates. The famous thumbs-up-down gesture appears nowhere in reliable Roman sources. Contemporary texts describe thumbs pressed against the chest or extended horizontally. Modern films show wild, untrained brawling rather than the technical, almost choreographed combat that archaeological evidence supports. Isotope analysis of teeth and bones reveals the diverse origins of fighters, men brought from throughout the empire to die for Roman entertainment. Personal items found in graves, small trinkets, religious symbols, and occasional inscriptions humanize these ancient athletes, showing individual identities behind their professional roles. Most revealing are the occupational markers, specific patterns of bone development and injury unique to gladiators. Sword arms show asymmetrical development. Shoulder and hip joints display distinctive wear patterns from repetitive training movements. Particular fracture types appear consistently across specimens separated by centuries and geography. So now, looking at the physical evidence of what gladiators truly endured, their warped bones, healed fractures, and specialized diets, the question remains: could you have survived not just one fight, but enough to earn that wooden sword of freedom? Or would you be just another forgotten body under an amphitheater, your blood long since washed away from the sand where you fell?